I apparently have a death wish to burn my channel down as I lose about 10 subs every time I do a video like this. But it needs saying. If you remember, back in June I made a video asking for links for instances people considered regressive. I got tons and tons of links for which I thank you all, and it has taken me quite a while to filter through them. A few major patterns emerged in what people consider regressive. I discussed one point in my video on soft power and diplomacy, which I implore you to watch before you watch this video series. The one and only definition of the regressive left is a purely European ideology that did actually allow spousal abuse and trafficking to thrive with a dogmatic European, naive idealism of multiculturalism that blinded them to the idea that other people can have a completely different, more violent mindset and not have sufficient vigilance and safeguards against certain crimes because prior to immigration they were not an issue on the scale requiring it. This is the true and first definition of regressive left. I only had one person post links on these and a few vague mentions from others. The police were also not equipped to deal with or expect certain crimes that immigrants and North African refugees did that was unthinkable by Europeans, even though overall crime by first-generation refugees is significantly lower than native and second-generation immigrants, due to fear of deportation. Mob gropings and harassing was not something even thought of as a potential crime, and it threw them off entirely. Even worse, thanks to antiquated laws on rape that should have been changed decades ago, a woman was actually charged for bringing up false charges against an attacker because she didn't struggle out of fear, though she vocally told them to stop while being raped. It took the immigrant outrage to finally pass a no means no law, which should have been passed much sooner in Germany. It is also a reference to a rather cynical ploy by specific members of the British Labour Party to cater to hyper-segregated Muslims to win votes by showing hypocrisy toward backing British rule of law in a bid for Muslim votes, a situation that wouldn't even be an issue if better housing policy had been set up for better integration. Places with multicultural policies without good housing and integration policies end up with ghettos and angry second and third generations who can't find jobs due to stigma against the way their name sounds. Regressive left is a naive view of the great experiment and richness of multiculturalism without putting proper laws and focus into place to ensure society isn't harmed by it. Throwing away or villainizing multiculturalism is throwing the baby out with the bath and is not a counter to regressive leftism. A deep study of other multicultural nations and their laws is. One of the few things America does better than almost any other nation when we aren't panicking is integrating immigrants. We sadly, however, go to the exact opposite of regressive left and just have absolute fear and bigotry of any new wave of immigrant, which is what is happening in Europe right now. Majid Nawaz is a former radicalized Muslim who is calling for a reformation of Islam through the group Quilliam. He coined the initial term regressive left, but once it became a catch-all pejorative used mostly by the right, but also anti-feminists and anti-Muslims, he stopped using it. His group supports programs for radicalized youth that uses tactics created to combat the neo-Nazi radicals. He criticizes the hyper-segregated Islamic communities, which was a mix of self-segregation and of bad housing policies, creating ghettos where many third-generation immigrants have no non-Muslim friends. This is a problem throughout a lot of Europe. Fixing the housing policies could stop the increase of ghettos and reduce radicalization. Northern Ireland had the same problem where Protestants only lived around, went to school with, and knew Protestant people. Likewise with Catholics, and never the twain met. And the us versus them caused violence and chaos to continue decades longer than it should have. This segregation made things dangerous for lawmakers and police to make policies such as prosecuting female genital mutilation, abuse of gays, or preventing domestic violence, as it has become a powder keg in many of these regions. It also increases the chances of being prosecuted for blasphemy laws. Majid also criticized some labor groups in specific areas of the country that, trying to cynically get the vote of Muslim segregated areas, act hypocritically and turn a blind eye to these abuses in exchange for their vote, while at the same time speaking out strongly on those issues such as feminism and gay rights, when it comes to anyone other than Muslims for fear of losing their vote. Sadly, this complexity and possible hypocrisy has given tons and tons of fodder to the knee-jerk anti-immigrant conservatives, UKIP and the BNP, to be completely anti-immigrant and conflating integration policy failures with fear-mongering about Islam, foreigners, and prejudice. Once labor became vulnerable and people viewed them as regressive left, their right-wing news media began doing what Fox News does and reported on anything even if it wasn't regressive, and got blown out of proportion and labeled as examples of the horrors of multiculturalism and the Muslims taking over and declaring Sharia law on them. Even though by 2050, France, with the highest Muslim population in Europe, is projected to only have around 15%, which is hardly a way to produce Sharia law unless only extremist Muslims show up to vote. Europe and Canada have rather interesting views on how immigration should work. They like immigrants, but they feel they would be happier living with their own kind. Basically, they want the benefits of immigration without actually having to be around them and intermix. That causes little pockets of tension in a tiny Muslim nation living in a much larger liberal country. Germany, France, Belgium all have these problems as well. In the US, while there are often ethnic communities, we work hard to ensure that they talk to and get to know the rest of Americans. Nearly no other foreign community talks to the FBI and police the way the Muslim community does in the US. They have their anchor point with the community, but intermingle with the rest of the country. Fixing the problem in Europe is not going to be as satisfying as getting angry, being afraid, or deporting people. It's going to require a systematic revamp of immigration, integration, and housing in rather boring methods, and vigilance in changing tack when new issues come up that no one could have anticipated. Sweden is currently viewed as the gold standard for European integration, using American tactics with a blend of their own socialist policies. Hyper-segregated Muslims do make it rather difficult for police. There are local Sharia courts the community will set up, so some police sometimes let them police themselves, to an extent, which can be very bad for everyone involved when the rule of law isn't in place for everyone. And because of these unfortunate political failings, people voted for Brexit. The funny thing being, of course, that the people most afraid of immigrants and likely to vote for Brexit have been shown to be the least likely to be around immigrants, just like any freaked out group that fears what it doesn't understand. Much like how Bobby Jindal insisted there were police no-go zones in the UK in Muslim areas, which was absolutely untrue. There are proven methods for integration that will kill radical Islam in Europe, but it will involve boring social reorganizing and slight temporary discomfort, which is sadly not going to happen for a while thanks to the political chaos they currently have, and the tactics are better defined and explained to the public. Is talking about these solutions denying that Islam is the source of the problem? No. However, in the next video, I'll be going into the problems of the scale of the argument at hand and what can be done by us to fix the problem at hand. Will deporting Muslims or banning Islam or forcing deconversions from Islam fix the problem? As you could see from my video on soft power, no way in hell. It will just make the problem worse. There are Muslims who don't live in these clusters and have integrated in these European countries with non-Muslim friends and acquaintances. When this happens, Islam is tamed and no longer in the radicalizing echo chamber. If you look at all the core books of religion, Judaism should be way more violent than Islam. But due to long social conditioning, Judaism has become one of the tamest religions in the world. Christianity is the source of homophobia in the US, and until gays started openly coming out more and more, most Christians didn't know they knew gay people, and vilified them as this crazy pedophile monster. The same is true about how they viewed atheists. Young Christians these days in the US have both gay and atheist friends, and don't care if you believe or are gay. Their echo chamber is being diluted, and they are becoming less and less radical in their beliefs, making them safe and benign. When I try and defend Muslims from generalizations, people tell me, that's because you met one or two nice Muslims, while ignoring that the majority are assholes or horrible people. No, I look at what caused the nice Muslims and want us to work hard to replicate that, instead of just focusing on demonizing them as horrible monsters. Much like how the people most afraid of Muslims are people who don't actually know more than a few, and only listen to the echo chamber of fear of Islam that they will try and take over and enforce Sharia law replicates. By the way, I don't live in Europe. I have to rely on research. I live in America, which is why I can speak with such authority on American politics and integration. This is a summation of what I have researched and what was given to me when asked. I will be making annotations if any of this is proven to be untrue by either side. Thank you. And that is real, legitimate sources, not right-wing news and websites without actual sources, though I know people will try and use them in the comments section.